My name is Davis Wardwell. I'm 18
My name
years
is
old.
Lisa
My name is
Hannon.
Noah Blunt. I'm the student pastor here
Trio
at Westside.
Quinn. I'm actually Charlie's cousin.
David Thomas, here with Charlie.
Austin Gregory. Thank you for having
My
me.
name is Donovan
My name is
Jones.
Micah Aver. I'm a student at Lowndes High
All
School.
right. Well, Mr. Charlie, you're going to lead us out here tonight on your Young Minds podcast.
All right, welcome back to the podcast, and I'm so glad to have Reed Salter on with me. If you could introduce yourself, and we'll keep on rolling.
I love it. Just thanks so much for having me. My name is Reed Salter. I am the area director for Young Life here in Valdosta in Lowndes County. Mm-hmm. And a little bit about me, like to tell you my story. I grew up in Statesboro, Georgia, and I grew up in an amazing family, two parents who were together, a younger brother, just a year and a half younger. And went to Bullock Academy, like a Valwood-sized school for people who are local and know Valwood. But we grew up going to church. I would say that it mostly was kind of a social thing. Like we went to church, but it maybe didn't translate as much to our home life. And I would describe the way that I viewed God as kind of a distant judge of sorts who really was primarily concerned with me being good. And the more good that I was, the more good that I tried to be, that God would love me more, is what I thought. And I really made that my mission in life, to be good. And I would say, like, by middle school, I had kind of achieved that reputation on the outside. Like, I was the friend when I was at a sleepover that the parents would put me in charge. They're like, okay, Reed, you are the one who's responsible. You're good. So I had that reputation, but I would say on the inside, I was exhausted. I was really timid and insecure, and I was lonely. And it started to change for me my freshman year of high school when this guy named Dusty was my freshman baseball coach, and he was a Young Life leader. And Young Life was brand new in our town. I didn't know anything about it, but he said, hey, you should come to Young Life Club. And so I went a couple of times, and I remember people who were there really wanted to be there. And I had been to some Christian things where, like, you could tell nobody wanted to sing. It just the kind of the events that I had been to were like that. But people wanted to be at Young Life. They were excited to sing, to hear about Jesus. And so I loved it, even though I was really shy and it wasn't maybe my scene. And so a couple baseball practices later, Dusty said, you want to go to Colorado to Young Life camp? And I said, sure. So I take this flyer home to my parents, and they're like, what is Young Life? What is this organization? And a couple months later, I got on a bus. We rode 36 hours to Colorado, and I ended up, we say that camp's the best week of your life. And it was the week that changed my life forever. I would say I had heard the gospel countless times growing up in church, but that was the first time that I truly understood what God had done for me, that he wasn't wanting me to be good, that I couldn't earn his love, but that he died for me and that I needed to accept this gift. And so I would say that is when I prayed to receive Christ, when it became my own faith. It was incredible. So I came back to my high school, and the rest of my high school experience really was positive overall. Like, I didn't feel like I had to earn God's love in the same way. My reputation was largely the same, and I was able to help Young Life, which was brand new, grow at my school. I got my brother and a lot of our friends involved and was discipled by my Young Life leader, and it was super formational.
That's awesome. That's really, really cool. Especially because, like, you think about, like, especially you were saying that, you're kind of a shy person, whatever, and then you're going off to this camp, this that, like, for me, because believe it or not, like, it depends on the situation I'm in. I'm a bit introverted, depending on, like, if I'm, like, doing whatever I'm doing. So something like that, I would be like, oh my gosh, like, I'd be scared to death. But that's so cool.
Yes, it definitely was. I was maybe a little bit more of a spectator, and I was participating, but just at my own speed.
Yeah.
And I was really one of the only freshmen. I had just graduated or just finished my freshman year of high school, so I was one of the younger people on the trip. But they really brought me along and cared for me really well. Like, didn't make me do anything that I didn't want to do, but also welcomed me and invited me into more adventure, more friendships, and kind of the community aspect was really important for me.
And that's really
in high
good
school.
Because I think a lot of high schoolers, they like say, like, if they're friends with well, you know, if they want to be friends with, like, older people, right? Older, you know, like, say, like, seniors, whatever. You know, they're like, well, how are the seniors going to treat me? You know, because I'm a freshman or, like, whatever. And so that's really encouraging to hear that they didn't treat you, like, a different way. They just were like, you know, come on.
Yeah.
You know, that's really, really cool. So what church do you go to, and why'd you pick it?
So my wife Emily and I go to Crossroads Baptist Church. We moved here in 2021, so it's kind of post-COVID.
Things were getting back to normal.
Yeah, things were getting back to normal. We moved from the metro Atlanta area. We had gone to an Anglican church in Atlanta that we really loved. And so the Valdosta church scene was a little bit different. And in the stage of life that we were in, it took us a little while to find people in our same stage of life. And there are plenty of them in Valdosta, and we've learned that now. But we probably tried 7 or 8 different churches that in that 8 or 9 months that we were first here.
Yeah.
And I would say that we landed on Crossroads because that's where we first found some of the community that we're looking for. It had the solid teaching. It had all of the core elements. But as we started going to our Connect group, like Sunday school, and we started meeting some people, I would say that is what drew us in. And we kind of knew people there because Emily is a kindergarten teacher at Crossroads School. And so that's kind of how we got invested in that community. And so it's been now 2.5 years, and we've really loved it and have enjoyed being involved.
That's awesome. You know, and well, you know, when you said it, that kind of sort of shocked me. Like, moving from Atlanta to down here, I bet that was a shock. Like, you know, a bit of a culture shock in a way, like, because of the way you live up there and then down here. Like, just the traffic, right? I mean,
yeah,
there's a lot less traffic. Well, you know, if it keeps getting bigger, there'll be a lot more traffic. But, dude, that's crazy.
Yeah, you know, it depends on the time of day in Valdosta. Sometimes there's traffic around the holidays and stuff, but it was a huge adjustment for Emily and I because we didn't know anyone before we moved here. We had been in Atlanta for 3 years. We got married in 2020, which is a crazy time to get married, and I was finishing kind of a 3-year internship with Young Life where I was training under someone. And so my time there was coming to an end, and I was ready to kind of move on to what was next. And Young Life said, this is where the open position is. And so we didn't know anyone, and we had all kinds of community and friends, and Atlanta was very familiar to us. And so it really was, the Lord called us into something new and unknown, which was scary, but really brought Emily and I together in a way that I don't think we would have experienced outside of this experience.
That's really cool. So, you know, for people that don't know what it is, we talked about it, of course, a lot because you're a part of it. But what is Young Life? Like, what, you know, if you had to describe it, what is it?
Yeah, Young Life is a Christian outreach organization for high school students. And so our staff and volunteers enter the world of high school students, focusing on what matters to them: fun, adventure, a sense of significance. And we do this in hopes of earning the right to share the gospel with them, what we believe is most important. And so really, if I had to say in 2 words what Young Life is about, it would be Christ and kids. And we do it through relationships. Instead of just saying, hey, we're doing this event, come to our Christian thing, we go show up at the high school and we say, hey, I want to get to know you, and we build friendships. Because if I walked into Lowndes High School lunch today and I started telling people about Jesus, they'd say, who are you?
Yeah.
Who are you to say this to me?
Yeah.
But if you build a friendship first and get to know them, and you show up at the soccer games or at the one-act play and you say, hey, I care about you, and they start to be like, oh, no, this guy's okay. I kind of like this guy.
Yeah.
You're able to say, hey, this is why I show up to all of these things. God is actually inviting you into a relationship with him, into this life and this adventure that you may not even be aware of.
That's right.
And so that is, at a macro level, a very high level of what Young Life is.
And did you go to Lowndes today? Or
I was at Lowndes today.
Okay. So I'm just, because I thought this was always so funny that you guys would do this, but come in and do like the polls or whatever, and see what was today's? Because I remember it was what was the tally for today? I don't remember what it was.
It was, do you like cranberry sauce?
No, I'd have been one of those that would have been marked no. I'm just not a big.
People felt very passionately about cranberry sauce today, mostly in a negative way, but kind of our heart in doing that. We started a year ago, and so it is a very neutral way to engage high school students. And so we tried to pick things that anyone could answer. Almost everyone today had heard of cranberry sauce, and people light up to be able to answer whatever it is. Last year around this time, we asked ham or turkey, and there's nothing better than some friendly banter between two high school kids, one saying, man, that's nasty, ham is way better than turkey, or vice versa. And it's been a great touch point with high school students, regardless of how they feel about Jesus or Christianity, but they're like, oh, I kind of like that guy. And I've been around town, I've been in Cercheros twice, two different ones, and the guy making the burrito bowl says, are you the question guy?
No.
At Lowndes? And I'm like, it's me.
That's funny. Well, because I don't even know, you probably don't remember, but I've seen you 1,000 times over there. I remember what in the world? But I thought it was so funny. I would think in my head, I'm like, yeah, I'd be like one or the other. I don't, depending on what the category was. But oh my gosh, that was always so funny to watch. And that was really, really cool, and still cool that you guys do that. Because like you said, it really, it gets people talking, and and it's also and it gets them talking about just something that may seem insignificant, but they're talking about they're not talking about vulgar things or what, they're just being nice to each other and just having some friendly banter back and forth, like you said, because so many things I think in high school, can be looked on a negative way, or they might be thinking in a negative way or whatever, but that gives them a chance to not be that, not think that way.
Yes, it's no drama, or a lot of high school humor, like you said, is vulgar, or it's at someone else's expense and that kind of thing. But just, I would say a core value of Young Life and what we try to do is humor is involved, in this sense of silliness for the sake of just being silly. Everything doesn't have to be so serious. Because we know Jesus, we can let our shoulders down and just have fun with things and be silly. That's good. Which I love.
Yeah. So, how have you seen God work in Young Life? I mean, you've said it a little bit, but, has there been any specific examples, or, is there a moment that sticks out? Or is it just every time you guys meet, that you see him work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say first, and I didn't say this about asking about Young Life, as far as when we meet and that kind of thing. We meet every Monday night at 7:27, and we meet right now at the boardroom on Northside Drive. Last year we met at my house, and we kind of outgrew it, and it's a fun story in itself. But we meet on Monday nights, and there is always music, there are games, friendship, we call it best friend stuff. And then at the end, a Young Life leader, which is me or one of our volunteers, shares up and gets to talk about Jesus out of the Bible. But as far as how we've seen the Lord work, when I moved here, there had not been a Young Life staff person here for a year. So it had kind of been volunteer-led, like that weird COVID year. And they did an amazing job, but without a staff person, it's really hard to grow. A lot of our leaders had graduated who were mostly college students. And so in a lot of ways, it was kind of a total rebuild. And the beginning of last year is when that started to change, when a group of seniors at Lowndes High kind of caught the vision for what we were doing, when we started talking about, hey, you can leave a legacy at your high school. Like, what if when you graduate, that there are people who don't say, yeah, that guy had a cool truck, or that guy could hit a ball far, but what if they said, man, that person really cared about me. They showed me Jesus. They welcomed me in. And so we kind of talked about that at the beginning of the year. And some guys like Jesus Uribe, Nemo, Noah, and Hogan Wright were a few of the OGs last year. And they started saying, man, we want this to be for everyone. And so Young Life really kind of blew up last year. And so we were meeting at my house, which is down the street from Northside. And it started, and there were like 30 or 40 people, and then it grew by Christmas to 60. And
oh my gosh!
By the springtime, and by the spring, our last two clubs, there were like 85 people.
That's awesome.
In our living room, and we don't have a big living room.
I was about to say,
it was absolute chaos, but it was the best. Like, people would hang out for an hour afterwards. We let everyone sign our front door with this gold Sharpie. And so it was so special to watch the Lord use our efforts, which we're not doing anything magical. We are participating in God's work of drawing people to himself. We're helping to create a space on Monday night for high schoolers just to be high schoolers, to have fun. And we meet with all three schools together, which has been really beautiful. Of, there can be some division, some different feelings between the three schools.
Especially when you have, like, a rivalry between, Lowndes and Valdosta sometimes. I mean, that's a factor.
Yeah, 100%.
That's a factor.
But kind of what we've heard, the resounding comments from our high school friends is that we love being all together. That it's really fun, that, hey, I maybe had this preconceived idea about this person who went to this school, but now that I've hung out with them and gotten to know them, they're okay. Yeah. And that's been a cool kind of redeeming thing.
And that's awesome, dude. Like, especially, so is the third one, is it, what's the third school? Is it, Valwood or?
Valwood,
okay,
yes. Right now, we're at Lowndes, Valdosta, and Valwood, but any high school student in Lowndes County is invited to come. So we have homeschool friends. We have friends from Highland. Anyone is invited to show up at 727, because that's a misconception sometimes. People will DM us and they're like, how do I join Young Life? Because people just kind of see it as a school club. They just don't know. Yeah. And it's like, nah, man, just show up. We'd love to have you. Yeah. So it's fun.
That's really cool. So, in your opinion, what is the best thing about Young Life and for you? Like, in your opinion, what's the best thing?
I would say the best thing is watching high school people go from death to life in Jesus. Like, watching a high schooler who maybe had no idea about the gospel, which, even living in South Georgia, there are some who really don't have an understanding of what Jesus has done for us, or maybe they've grown up hearing it their whole life, and they get to hear about Jesus in terms that they can understand. Yeah. They hear it relationally from their Young Life leader who is invested in them, who's walking it out, who is modeling what it looks like to be a disciple of Jesus. And they realize, I don't have to live life on my own anymore. I don't have to live apart from God, that I can be in this relationship. And their lives begin to change because of the power of the Holy Spirit. And so that is why we do what we do, is to introduce high schoolers to Jesus Christ and then to help them grow in their faith.
That's really, really good. So good, dude. So when you look at young people today, and this is very applicable to these questions that are coming up are very applicable to what you do. When you look at young people today, do you see hope, or are you worried about the future?
I would say I see a lot of hope for the future. There are all kinds of opinions out there about Gen Z, and honestly, you could find tons of things where people talk negatively, but from my work with high school people, there's no population of people that are more full of life, who desire authenticity and real conversation, and really desiring truth. And they are navigating life the best way that they know how. And yes, there are challenges that they will face. And that's something that as a 29-year-old, I got the very beginning of the social media stuff, like that whole realm. It kind of just missed me or grazed me, if you will. And there are challenges that 17-year-old guys and girls walk through that I have no idea about. I read a really great book called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, and it talked a lot about social media, technology's impact on Gen Z, and some different things like that. And it painted a picture that needs to be taken seriously about technology's use in that world. But I would say overall that I have a lot of hope for the generation, that Gen Z, with their compassion and empathy and desire for truth, that they will make a tremendous impact on the kingdom.
That's good. And one thing that you brought up that's so true about Gen Z wanting realness, right? And the way that somebody speaks to them or whatever. Somebody, like, it was a podcaster friend of mine, they said they were going to speak at their local church, at a youth group, and he's like, any advice do you have for me? And I said, don't fake it. I don't, like, we can tell that you're faking it. Like, don't fake it.
100%.
Because there's been a few times where, everybody's been to at least one or two, you've heard somebody speak and you're like, okay, but you can tell you're trying to put on some sort of kind of performance deal to make us, keep us awake. Like, don't fake it.
Yeah, it's so true. And so what we tell all of our young life leaders, like people who are new, and we talk about working with high schoolers, we say, be yourself. High schoolers, they don't need you to be what you think is this cool, hip, Christian, whatever you sometimes think you need in that realm. No, if God is inside of you and is working in you, they just need you to be yourself. And that is the most encouraging, life-giving thing, where people say, man, I see that person is just being who God created them to be. And it gives hope, I think, to the next generation.
So what advice would you give to someone who's struggling to navigate this world in a biblical way? Like, if one of your students came up to you and said that, like, I'm struggling to navigate this world in a biblical way, what would you tell them?
Man, these are great questions. I would say that we were not created to do life alone. Like, the community for a high school, if I was talking to a high school guy, I would say having a group of guys that you can be real with, who are headed on the same trajectory in life that you are, that you can circle up and talk with consistently, I would say that is huge. And that kind of thing doesn't happen by accident. You have to fight for that time. Yeah. And I would say in that, and individually too, spending time in Scripture is, you can't underestimate the value of it. I think a lot of times people are like, man, I don't know why I'm not hearing from the Lord. Like, I feel like he's not speaking to me. And it's like, have you spent time in Scripture recently? Like, the primary way that God speaks to us is through his word. And so I think focusing on sitting in Scripture, and this is something that I struggle with. Like, sometimes I need to take my AirPods out. I need to turn the podcast off, and I need to have a few moments of silence with the Lord, because I can't expect God to yell over the podcast that I'm listening to and that kind of thing.
That's right. Because he speaks in the quiet moments.
He really does. And if we're never quiet, I think we miss it.
That's right. So, when it comes to, teaching the gospel, like, do you change your approach in any way? Like, if you have a certain, people group, whatever, because there's all these different types of groups and, like, people that believe this and that and the other. Do you, of course, you're teaching the same message, but do you change it in any way?
Yeah. I do have the opportunity kind of to speak to different groups, and I do think there is value of meeting people where they are. In Young Life, sometimes we call it putting the cookies on the bottom shelf. Like, we at a Young Life club, we try really hard to talk about Jesus as if people have not heard it before. In a church setting, it's fine to say, yeah, we've all heard the story of the Good Samaritan, or yeah, y'all know about the synagogue and about the Pharisees and things like that. Yeah. I would say in most of my ministry context, we explain those things as if people have never heard them. Because from my experience, I sat with a guy one time in a Bible study and we were talking about the Sabbath. And I said, does anyone know what the Sabbath is? And they kind of were quiet and looked at me, and a guy said, is it a person? And people just don't know. And so I think taking an extra effort to put the gospel in terms that people can understand and helping make the stories come alive. Like, I think sometimes we can read a story in scripture and it's just two-dimensional on a page. But when we're talking to high school students, we say, can you imagine what it would be like to be in this story? What would it have smelled like and felt like? And what do you think the people in the crowd were experiencing? And I think, for me, at least in my experience, it's helpful for making the gospel come alive. And then talking about how does it impact us today.
That's good.
And so, depending on the context, maybe you would go into more detail or maybe go deeper in certain aspects. Like, for example, at Young Life Club, we really stick to lifting up the person of Jesus, like explaining the basics of the gospel, where, we're an ecumenical kind of non-denominational ministry, which means we aren't affiliated with any particular church. So we're not getting in the weeds of hotly debated theological issues. Like, that's not really our lane, where we want high school kids to get the clearest possible picture of who Jesus is and what he came to do for us. And so we kind of stay in that realm.
That's good. That's really, really good. So, if you could describe Young Life in one word, what would it be and why? You might have to think about this for a second, because sometimes I'll change the question up a little bit, like say north side or whatever.
Yeah.
And people, they just kind of stop for a second. They're like, ooh, yeah.
That's a great question. I would say incarnational is the word, and it's a word we use to describe Young Life some, but really we are modeled after the incarnation of Jesus. Like, we use John 1:14 all the time, that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The Message says that Jesus put on skin and moved into the neighborhood. And so, just like Jesus did that, our hope is that Young Life leaders, that we would enter the world of high school students, meet them where they are, and regardless of their response, love them, point them to Jesus, and our hope would be to share the gospel with them in words.
That's good. Well, besides, that's my last question, but what is your life verse, and why is it important to you to end it off?
My life verse is Matthew 13:44, which says, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that a man discovered hidden in a field. In his excitement, he hid it again and sold everything that he had to get enough money to buy that field." I think I come back to this verse so often, partially because of its simplicity, but I really love it because I think it gets at the heart of what we believe, that, and it goes both ways. First, the way that I looked at it first was that when we realize the value of a relationship with Jesus, when we truly realize what he's done for us, we realize it's worth selling everything. It's worth sacrificing anything to follow him. But then also a couple of years ago, I heard someone preach on this passage, and it talked about how Jesus is also that man who discovered us, and who sold everything to be in a relationship with us. He went so far that he died on the cross in our place for our sake, that he could have us, that we are his treasure in that way. And it changed the way that I looked at this verse and solidified it even more for me.
That's good. That's really, really good. But that's all the questions I have. But is there anything that you want to say, or any words of encouragement or anything before we get out of here?
I have a question for you, if that's allowed.
Yeah.
What has been the biggest encouragement, or what's something that you've learned through this process of being a podcaster and interviewing people?
The biggest encouragement is just watching people, or one of them, there's been plenty, but one of the biggest ones is watching people step up, especially young people, like we've talked about today, because I know it's not easy to, talk to, even if it's just me, talking about your story, because some people have some, rough testimonies, that it's hard to talk about sometimes. But and like one of the funny things that I always say, that one thing I've learned is that technology doesn't always work, but because I've had things go wrong a few times, but there's been some really, really awesome conversations, and also too, and I've said this a couple times, but even if you don't exactly, because it's hard to remember all the stories that I get told every week, because I've done over 100 episodes of them.
Wow.
But in that moment when you're listening to somebody, be present with them in the moment. Hear what they have to say, and then have an appropriate response back to them. Yeah. Or sometimes there may not be a response at all. It may just be, wow, that was, because I've been speechless a few times. Because you think, my gosh, somebody went through that, or some, whatever. And it's, because you can't fathom it. Mm-hmm. But they come out the other side because of Jesus, Yeah. And that's only some of the stuff I've learned. There's been plenty of stuff I've learned, but...
Man, that's so important. Being a listener is such a lost art, but it's so key to being a good friend, a follower of Jesus, and all of those things. And I think it's a gift that you have, even in this being our first interaction, really, outside of the time that we met, which I can tell that story.
Yeah, we can. Go ahead.
If we want to.
Go ahead.
If we have time.
Yeah, we got time.
Okay, so Charlie and I met at the Mailbox Club banquet. Uh-huh. I was doing registration very last minute, didn't know a lot about what was happening, but Charlie comes through the line, and I had seen about your podcast, I think, on your Instagram, and then through Lowndes FCA, and just kind of being in similar circles at Lowndes. Mm-hmm. And so I was checking Charlie in, and I said, "You have a podcast, don't you?" I was like, "That's you?" And Charlie said, "Yeah, do you want to be on it?" And I said, I was like, let's talk more about this. It happened very fast.
Well, because I knew who you were. I was like, I knew exactly who you were.
Yes.
And so I was like, because, and what was so funny is I didn't know I was going to see you, of course. And, because what was funny about the whole thing was, out of all the lines, because there was multiple lines you could get in, mm-hmm. I was like, I hope I get in his, because I know who he is.
Yes.
And then, I landed in yours, and then that just happened to be where you asked if I had the podcast or not.
It's so funny how in the age of social media and that kind of thing, a lot of, you're like, oh, I know of that person. I know that person does these things, and then you get to meet them, and it's really cool how the Lord kind of orchestrated.
Isn't it? That's really cool.
This moment.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm so glad to have you on for the final interview of this year, and I can't wait to see what God does with it.
Yeah, I feel really honored. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. With another episode of the Young Minds Podcast coming to a close, I just want to remind you that you are never alone and faith is action. So let's get out there.